it seriously. Everybody says they point the finger at government like government's evil and how we shouldn't have this. It's a fiction, blah, blah, blah. If the Bible plainly says government is instituted to punish the wicked, the reason why you're having such a problem is because we've all been wicked. We're running around trespassing on chattel paper. We're trespassing on the trustees' rights. We're using the property of that's theirs, and we're not even using it right. That is the simple side, and we don't even
Bingo.
realize it. But
Bingo.
think about it further. Do you really not want government to punish your neighbor if your neighbor freaking breaks into your house? Oh, yes. Everybody would say, oh, yes. If my neighbor hits my car, I need government to make sure I get paid. If they kill my dog, if they do all this bad stuff, but we never like government when it's on us, when we don't even understand why it's on us.
Well, this is one of the things, so many people especially hate on the police, because that's typically the ones that they interact with the most because they've especially been arrested. Well, the reality is this. First and foremost, in just a general sense, when things are peaceful, if there wasn't the police, it wouldn't be so peaceful, I'd have to believe, because criminals would think that, oh my God, they can just get away with anything at any time, anywhere, because there is no police to even stop me. Yeah. So that being said,
they decriminalized drugs in California, and they decriminalized any crimes for less than $1,000. So what are you seeing in California? You're seeing a rise in drug things, drug use, and then you have the drug addicts going into the store and only taking a few things, so the cops won't even respond.
Yep. And this is where, too, in fact, there's videos out there where they have these robbery raids where a whole mob of kids, I would think, but maybe some young adults, go into a store, either, a little 7-Eleven or Walmart or whatever, and they just raid the place and grab whatever they can, armfuls of stuff, and head on out. But yeah, they keep it under $1,000, $999. And, yeah, they don't have to worry about shit. Nothing. Yeah. So believe me when I say that the reason why each and every one of us, and this includes me, because I'm one that I didn't get into this until I got stung. Well, I blamed them. Part of the reason, like Preacher said, I ended up going to law school. Part of the reason why is the intent was to learn how to beat them at their own game. Well, ultimately, I started realizing not only did I figure out how to beat them, so to speak, but I realized, too, that I was actually the problem.
That's what I learned.
I was the problem. It wasn't them. Everything that has ever happened to me, and I can assure you, if all of you were honest with yourself and think back to everything that you consider to have been bad in your life, it wasn't because of somebody else. It was because of a decision you made. You made the decision. You were the culpable one.
And this is the hardest thing. This is the hardest thing people have to deal with. When I went through, I started my movement in this under fire. I went through a 7-year court battle with family court. Not a divorce, not a custody battle, none of that stuff. It was, they come against me and my whole family, okay? And what I learned, I did processes. I did the GSA bonds in that court case. And yes, they do work. I can tell you that now. So I did the GSA bonds. But up until then, I did everything. I did notices. I did filings. Nothing worked. And I got to realizing, eventually, wait a minute, this whole thing about U.S. citizen, state citizen, all there's truth to it. I found the court cases. I got to finding, wait a minute, this system don't work like I think. And I got to realizing, wait a minute, I'm the problem. When I was 18, I didn't care what my rights were. I cared more about chasing women, getting drunk, and smoking pot. Now that we're in the situation we're in, it's like all of a sudden now I care about rights.
Imagine that. Imagine growing up and your viewpoints of yourself and the world change. God damn. How in the hell does that happen?
I actually heard it said one time, there will be those that don't understand the system and they will hate it. And there will be those that do and they will love it. And I'm going to tell you what, that is a true statement. When you start understanding the true nature of the system, you will end up loving it. Getting over your fear and everything else is the biggest problem.
Oh, and in fact, you just reminded me of something, preacher. This is something that I absolutely recommend to everyone. And I'm going to recommend it to the point that I'm going to straight up tell you, if you don't do it, you're going to be fucking yourself. And that is, if you don't do everything with love as the intent, doing what is best for everyone, I can assure you that if you go in with war in your heart, things are not going to go your way. In fact, they're going to bury you. They're going to win. The system will always win, and they're going to bury you. Go in with war in your heart. I guarantee you're going to lose.
This is why Derek Gonzalez, I like him. Me and him agree on a lot of things, but he holds on to too much anger, and it's going to get in the way of his success. The Bible says what? The meek shall inherit the earth. Now, meek doesn't mean weak. Meek means someone that knows, that has the weapons, knows how to fight, but chooses not to.
Exactly right. And that's another big misconception, that the meek is these weak, highly, easily intimidated people. Oh, hell no. I consider myself to be walking the path of the meek and doing the best that I possibly can each and every day. I was raised as a warrior. I was raised to fight. And when it came to especially government, and after I believed that I was being stung, all I wanted to do was watch the world burn. I can assure you that it is far better to put that sword into the sheath and use your words and your intellect to its fullest extent, and you only pull that sword as an absolute last resort. That is being meek, from my understanding. And you are willing to endure all things to that point of no return. But believe me, when you do pull that sword, you better be prepared for whatever comes your way. You better be prepared, if you're going to live by the sword, that you die by the sword. So don't worry if, that sword comes back and gets you. If you die by it, at least you were going out on your feet and not your knees.
It's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war.
Absolutely, brother.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So, yeah, it is one of those things that it's not easy to be humble. It's not easy to love on cops and DAs and judges. I have now got myself to that point where I do. But I can assure you, when I was having to go to court, I had to think of everybody in general when I had love in the heart. Because if I was to think about the DA or the judge specifically, I still wanted to rip heads off and shit down holes. That's just how it was. And I can assure you that the days that I walked in there with that attitude, shit didn't go my way. In fact, I ended up getting reincarcerated no less than about 7 times, I believe it was. In fact, I had to get myself some plastic frame glasses because they'd keep taking my glasses away because there was always metal in the frame somewhere. They said that it could be used as a weapon, so I had to get my going to jail glasses so that they wouldn't take the eyes away from me when I would be in jail. Seriously. That's no lie. I was swearing a stack of Bibles. But I can assure you, too, when I go in there with love in the heart, things always went my way. And just as a quick one, consequently, if I went in indifferent, or I didn't give a shit one way or the other, things didn't necessarily go my way, but they didn't necessarily go against me. It was kind of neutral. So go in, again, with love in the heart. I can tell you that there's been many men that know what I talk about and have practiced what I talk about and will tell you that, yes, when I went in with a war in the heart, I screwed myself. Go ahead, preacher.
I was going to say, Elena, Amber, any of y'all, if you got any questions, feel free to ask.
I was going to ask, what would you recommend for someone who wants to start to live right, to do these processes right from the beginning, so you're not having to go back and ask forgiveness for the trespasses that we're doing? I mean, obviously, there's been a lot already, so how do we undo the trespasses of the past and live from now on the right way? Where do we get started with that?
Well, before you jump in, preacher, let me just say one thing, and then I'll yield. First and foremost, do your best every day to walk the path that Jesus has laid, and I yield to preacher.
Now, remember something. Doesn't it talk about in the Bible how you're to ask forgiveness of those sins you know and the sins you don't?
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the process of cleaning up all the past chattel papers and everything else you've done to now. But to start learning the rules to the game, as you say it, I recommend to people start learning the law of agency first. Because if you're the agent for that trust, what is your duties as an agent before you move into other duties? For example, the agency principles will give you the basics, even though it's in depth on corpus juris secundum. It's but the book itself, the Gilbert's Law Summary on Agency, Partnerships, and LLCs, the agency section is decent. It's for testing for law students, right? So it's not going to have everything in it, but it's going to be a basic foundational thing, right? Now, once you do that, then you need to learn how to contract. You need to learn the rules to contract, right? Because now, once you learn those, if you want to live a private life, you can just concentrate on those. But if you're going to move into trust, what is a trustee? Jesse. A trustee is nothing but an agent for the trust. He's acting on behalf of the beneficiaries. So that means there's going to be different rules. If you're going to be an executor, a guardian, conservator, power of attorney, those are all agent positions with additional rules.
To do the deed and
see what I'm saying?
I bet you didn't word it right. So I go back in and look underneath
Jesse.
Community property clause under 38.002, and I'm going to refresh.
I had to mute him. He doesn't know he's unmuted and he's talking away.
Minister Jesse.
Yeah.
Well, also, I would recommend, aside from learning law of agency, because that is, it's a very highly important part in the whole thing. Learn contract basics and trust law basics. Now, the more you learn in any one of these topics and or any legal subjects that would be pertinent to you as the real party in interest, the more you learn, the better you're going to be. And called paperwork that you might do, it gives you the knowledge to ask the right questions, good, better, best. And when it comes to the questions, one of the things that I like to get out there is, especially in the essence of if somebody is in your face, they got you on the phone, they're at the doorstep, whatever. Asking the right questions, that their answers lay out the playing field. Then when you hit them with the hardball questions, they can't change the playing field because they were the ones that laid it out. Inevitably, when you hit them with the hardball questions, they're not going to want to answer because it's going to shoot themselves in the foot. Their answers are going to shoot themselves in the foot. But this is where it takes a bit of strategizing too. And what I tell everybody is this: on anything and everything that you think you might want to just make a so-called statement, a claim, figure out how to reword it so you can put a question mark at the end. It's really pretty much that simple. Because if you can make it as a statement, you can make it as a question. And if you're in the moment and you can't really think of one really quick, either at the beginning or the end of the statement, add, could it be? Or is it possible? And then that way you can put that question mark at the end. But always have that question mark at the end, because this is one of the things that is imperative in all these situations that we're talking about. Anytime somebody is coming at you, they're the ones that are making the claims. Onus probandi. They have to prove their claims. You are not obligated to help them in any way, shape, or form. But it is absolutely 100% your duty to yourself, when somebody is making a claim against you, that you maintain that claim on them, that burden stays right there with them, that you do not make any claims that you ultimately then have to prove, because you are not bound to prove your innocence. They are bound to prove your guilt. Do not help them. Do not volunteer. And in so many ways, well, this is real quick, one of the things that I wanted to put out there. Whenever some of these people are doing this, they are trained to ask you questions in hopes that you are afraid of looking stupid in their eyes, looking dumb in the eyes of your attackers. Don't worry about that. In fact, if you haven't seen the Kerry Zolman video, watch his video about how he deals with questions. Because simply put, if you don't ask what they mean by certain words, that if they make a statement and you do not ask, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? Let them answer and then revert this right back to, well, who's claiming that? You always got to get back to the claimant, the one that's actually making the claim. Say, for meddling interlopers. Nobody's ever going to be able to verify or define any of these words. They can't. Like I was saying earlier, number one, they weren't the author of these words, and these words are all written to be ambiguous. Like I've talked about before, the shade of gray, 50 Shades of Gray. If I write the word gray in a piece of legislation that becomes a code, if I'm thinking of the darkest shade of gray, I'm already automatically deceiving most people. But I've also given the flexibility, the ambiguity to the prosecutors, to where no matter what the defendant thinks, no matter what shade the defendant is thinking, as long as the prosecutor is at least a couple shades closer to dark than what the defendant is, the prosecutor is going to win. I've just given the ability for the prosecutor to, even though he doesn't know what I'm thinking either, the ability to flex it to whatever he needs it to be to obtain the win, to get a check mark in the win column. Go ahead, preacher. I yield.
There's a document I'm going to drop in the group. If people would read this and understand it, okay? I understand exactly what's going on. Let's see. This guy's named Eric Williams, and he had an IRS case in 1970. And he says, in regards to the use of my notice and demand by patriot idiots in conjunction with a court case, I have been in this freedom fight since 1964. In the beginning, not knowing any better, I accepted the teachings then prevalent among adherents. Today, that's Anna von Reitz, David Straight, all these different processes. During my early years, I learned most of what was then prevalent was total nonsense, non-think, patriot idiot rat poison. Unfortunately, this same nonsense is even more widespread today than back then. I suffered through it all until 1970 when I was prosecuted by the IRS for criminally failing to file or pay income tax. I went to federal district court in Los Angeles in 1970, all by myself with absolutely no plan of defense. I had filed no documents with the federal prosecutor or federal court. I was confident my creator would guide me safely through the battle or not, as he determined my situation and outcome would best serve his intentions. There were only 5 people in the federal courtroom: the judge, bailiff, clerk, IRS, prosecutor, and me. The case was called. The prosecutor stood and said, "Citizens of the United States have the obligation to blah, blah, blah." At which time I stood and said, "I object." The federal judge, "Why are you objecting? He hasn't said anything yet." Me, "Well, he said citizens of the United States have all those obligations he was listing, and that may be true, but he doesn't have anything in his file to put me in that class." You see how he turned that presumption back on them? It says, "Judge, are you renouncing your citizenship?" Me, "How can I renounce that which I never applied for?" Judge, me, "Where were you born?" No, Judge, "Where were you born?" Me, "At the time of my birth, I had just gone through a terrible ordeal. I was gasping for breath. I could not read or write. I did not know who I was, where I was, or even what I was." Judge, "What did your mother tell you?" Me, "At the time of my birth, I did not then understand the child-mother relationship. I could not pick my mother from a lineup of one." Judge, "What was on your birth certificate?" Me, "At the time of my birth, I was not then aware of the importance of such a document. I do not know if one was created or not, and I deny that any was." And pointing my finger at the IRS prosecutor, I said, "He can't prove it." Judge, "I am taking this matter under consideration, and you will be notified." That was 45 years ago, and I'm still waiting. I have never filed or paid or been bothered by the IRS. That right there, he testified based on first-hand knowledge. No hearsay. See what I'm saying? People would have a problem with that document because why? "Well, I know who my mom was." Really? Do you remember coming out from between her legs? Did you come out of her vagina and say, "Hey, Mom, give me a hug"? No, none of us did. We go in and testify to things we have no firsthand knowledge of, and we convict ourselves. We just agree to the contract. That's what it boils down to.
Sorry, my phone dropped.
Oh, you're fine.
But yeah, first-hand knowledge. I caught the last part of what you were talking about. We've talked about that one. This is that whole thing that we were talking about earlier. You know, when you're in court, no matter how many so-called papers you filed, it's not a reading. It's not a reading at all. It's a hearing. That's why they call them hearings. They want to have first-hand testimony. That's the whole reason for that. It's not about hearsay. It's about testimony being spoken right there and then.
Yeah, it's
and
called
of course,
fact
the judge
of the
will
case.
accept hearsay. This is the kind of the proof. The judge will accept hearsay. They'll let it go all day long. He who will be deceived, let him. If you allow that judge to accept hearsay, and this is the thing about not telling them that they can't accept hearsay, you ask the judge, does this court accept hearsay? Because
yes,
if it does,
if you
I got a
agree
guy
to
right
it.
over here in this back corner that I don't even know, but I'm sure I could pay him some money or something to come up here and testify.
There's a term you should get familiar with called fact of the case. They don't care about truth. They care about what is the facts agreed upon on the record. If all parties agree, That's all the judge cares about. You're negotiating a contract.
And this is something too. Keep this in mind. Truth and facts are ambiguous. This is why it has to be that two or more have to agree upon something, regardless of whatever that something is. And I use the analogy because it was used on me, the purple cow. The purple cow is simply this. First and foremost, if Preacher and I are looking at a cow out in the middle of the field and he sees white and I see purple, is he wrong or am I wrong? Well, the reality is we're both right, because if I see what I see, how is anybody to tell me that I'm wrong? And it's just that simple. Same thing with Preacher. If he sees white, well, who am I to tell him that he's wrong, even though I see purple? Now, in the essence of in a courtroom, let's say the Preacher is one attorney and I'm another, and we're looking at a picture of a cow out in the middle of a field, and everybody, including the jury, can see that that cow is plainly white. But on this particular day, it's the Preacher's job to argue that that cow is purple. And on this particular day, he rolls out a better sales pitch. He does a better job of convincing the folks on that jury. And at the end of the day, these jury members come back and they say that cow is purple. Well, what that means is for that situation, that essence and time, that cow is purple, regardless of what all people can see. That cow was purple. That is the facts. That is the truth for that situation that was on trial at that moment. And it is just that simple. That's how ambiguous the system is. But once you understand that, this is the big thing. Once you understand that, you can use that in your favor. Because they're going to do it, so why don't you too?
You got to quit using that ambiguous word.
What's that?
So you got to quit using that ambiguous word.
Yeah.
It makes me think of the SNL skit.
Well,
Ambiguously
this is
gay
the thing.
duo.
Well, like we were talking about earlier, I did go to law school. And in fact, one day in class, the professor was talking about how ambiguous the system is. And specifically, he was talking about the common law, these judges making so-called rulings in court. And he was talking about how, in a real general sense, to make his long story short, you can't get three judges to agree that they're drinking coffee when they're standing at the coffee machine drinking from the damn machine. That's how ambiguous it is. And I said, right in class, oh, yes, the ambiguity that I love so much. This professor said, it's all ambiguous. If it wasn't, we would all be looking for something else to do. He just said, without actually saying it, that it's so ambiguous that it doesn't mean shit unless you believe it does. That's the only reason they have attorneys, is because it is so damn ambiguous. And people do believe that even though it's ambiguous, that it actually applies to them, that it means something. And that's the reality of it. And it really doesn't. And because it is so ambiguous, and this is the thing with the Kerry Zolman video, is that because the wording is so ambiguous that if you play that in your favor, such as he did, they're going to let you go. They tested him hard. They had him sitting in a hearing for something like 8 hours, according to the story. And they only got him to answer 4 questions. And that did not include him claiming the name. He didn't claim the name. In fact, if I remember correctly, not only is it so ambiguous, but in that Kerry Zolman video, he took the glossary and there was something like he had a whole list of words out of the so-called IRS glossary, the definitions. And he had it all printed out, tried to get it on the record for this hearing. And the judge denied it. which was perfect, because had he got them to put that glossary on the record, it would have meant that all those people in that courtroom were bound by those definitions. But because the judge denied it, it also opened the book for him to be as ambiguous as he wanted to be. And as he tells it, I kind of remember saying something where they asked him a question and he started talking about his truck.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, what in the hell are you talking about your truck for? And he said, well, because out of his mouth to my ears, he asked me about my truck. And this is because they wouldn't define certain words. So it left it completely ambiguous for him to define those words in his own mind as to whatever the hell he wanted them to be. And it is that simple. It is that simple. This is why I talk about, if you know how this game works, you can get that pendulum swing in your direction, and it's quite simple to do. You just have to know who you are as a player in the game, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. So
that's all it takes.
So what are you thinking now that we've spoke?
I'm confused, honestly.
Go ahead.
Like, I hear everything you guys are saying, and I hear that it's like, you know, like the permanent fix, but I guess I'm more focused on like remedy for like dealing with that on the side, and then also getting remedy for like right now, like what I'm dealing with my mortgage. So I guess my question is,
tell her about your mortgage, Papa.
Well, my mortgage, or the mortgage,
mm-hmm.
right now, as it stands, is we're literally within just a couple weeks now of me getting a so-called declaratory judgment. What I did is I sent them a request for adequate assurance of due performance. And essentially, I asked to meet with the real party at interest, or whatever agent is willing to put up surety for the real party at interest. I also asked 19 questions, 19 yes or no questions, of which there was also then language in there that stated if they did not respond to this request, that there is going to be a dishonor of this request. And by dishonoring the request, it's going to be an agreement that there is no real party at interest, and then there is no debt. Well, when I first did it, when I first sent the first letter, and actually ended up sending two because I screwed up and I misstated the first one. So
mm-hmm.
by doing so, I ended up sending two of the first requests, got two signatures for those requests. The original mortgage company hot potatoed this so-called mortgage off to a third-party debt collector. So I've now been sending off notices, and the last one is just a couple of days away. As of May 1st, it will be the last day for the 30 days that I've given them, three of which are 30 days each for three different letters. The first one starting way back in December. So ultimately, by doing what I'm doing, these mortgage companies, by their dishonor of the request, have agreed that there is no real party in interest and there is no debt.
So I think I'm like in the same process, kind of. I sent a remittance coupon back the end of January. I didn't send it certified, so I like fucked up. But regardless,
certified. Well, let me explain certified. You got to rethink your this thing on certified, because here's what you can prove when you do certified mail. You can prove that they actually got an envelope. You can't prove what's in it. That's why you need a notary to do all your presentments.
Okay, so yeah, I didn't do that either. But regardless, they sent me a letter in the mail saying, hey, we received a notification of payment, but please send us the front and back copy of the check, or prove to us that the amount came out of your account. Like, you know what I'm talking about? Like, they sent a letter like that. So then I sent a conditional acceptance, basically just stating like, I know you guys are the trustees. Like, you guys have a fiduciary responsibility over the Cesta K trust name of my all caps name. And please.
Actually, no, they don't. The mortgage company does not. I'm going to show you who the trustees are.
Okay, well, that's the message I sent. And then they sent me back a letter saying, well, actually, there was a phone call in between the letter, the conditional acceptance, and then the letter they sent back to me. And he literally told me on the phone, why are you acting like this is some sort of dividend payout to you? That's literally what he said on the phone. And I was like, well, I didn't say that, but that's what you're saying. And if you're saying that, let's apply that. And he's like, no, this is not what that is. And so then he sent a letter.
Look on the screen.
Okay. So would I send the letter to them?
Yes. The agent's duty is to notify the principal. You're the general agent. Okay? Mm-hmm. You're supposed to only be doing business with them. Under the rules of agency, you have the authority to go out and issue collateral securities, that chattel paper, that promissory note. You did it in the name of the trust, not your name. Okay? Mm-hmm. You did it under the name of the trust. So basically in the statutes, it's, hey, under this statute, under indemnification, indemnify, indemnity, liability, whatever it may be titled in your state, the officers, directors, and agents do not hold liability for the principal. And under this code, the principal's duty is just for service. So, trustees, I am notifying you that your person has a matter that needs to be settled. Here you go. And you send everything to them because it's their property, not yours. Congressional record, March 9th, 1933. The United States has said what? They mortgaged all the homes and all the property of the people of the nation. Well, if they mortgaged it in exchange for government obligations, it's their obligations. The mortgage company is not the trustees, not like you're thinking.
Pastor, you know what was really interesting that I read yesterday was the IRS's mission statement and the way that they skew it in such the form and fashion that they then present to the people. Because the IRS is supposed to be working for us, not against, but we don't know how to work with or have them work for us, only have them work against us.
You're assuming that they're working against you. You're assuming. If you go in claiming that's your name, and that means you're saying it's your liability.
See, that is the thing I'm referring to us is that average population in the United States is that the way they skew the information is so manipulative.
It's not them
Although,
skewing
yes,
it.
You know, they're working for us, the people.
But it's not them skewing it. It's you skewing it. When you get a letter in the mail, you say, oh, it's talking to me because it says you, blah, blah, blah. You think you is you. It's not you. It's you're the agent that's supposed to forward it to the principal, which is what? The liable party.
There are certain offices within the IRS that do certain things as well.
It's still not skewed against you, the man. It's your ignorance that gets you there. Where is that contract with T-Mobile? Let me see here. Somebody shared this the other week, and it was like, holy crap, they sat there and admit it. Here we go. Look at this picture. Look at the bottom of the picture. Underneath the underlined lines. He missed this whole thing when he posted it. It says, it gets in, are you emancipated? Have you reached age majority defined in your jurisdiction, et cetera, et cetera. But what does it say? If you accept on behalf of an organization the social, that doesn't say that part, but it says of an organization, you're telling us that you are authorized to bind that organization, and references to you in these T&Cs may mean the organization. What is the social? It's an entity. It's not you.
And Social Security is an organization. Even though it's a trust, it's also an organization.
Mm-hmm. In Bankruptcy and Revised Article 9, Part 1 on YouTube, the 43-minute mark, Ms. LaRouche is talking about the registered organization, and the guy 2 spots to her right pops off and says, yes, and some say the state issues a birth certificate. The birth certificate's the day that organization was created. You've been thinking all this time that it's you, and it's not you.
And of course, here's one of the interesting little unwritten parts of it all. It's just something that you have to recognize, and the definitions of certain things, and then the actual scenario at hand. That people say, well, the scenario with me and the name and all this, it's not incorporated. Well, the reality is it actually is, when you take into consideration that they use the so-called birth certificate to create the so-called Social Security. The so-called Social Security and birth certificates are used to typically then obtain all other so-called things, such as marriage licenses, driver's licenses, yada, 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 yada. Well, the more pieces you put together on this little foundation of the so-called birth certificate, the more you are incorporating into it. It's all incorporated into one thing based off of one simple thing. Now, does that still have some issues? Well, yes, it does, but it's still the reality of the scenario. The facts cannot be denied, despite how ambiguous they might be. Now try to figure that one out. Try to figure out how the facts cannot be denied if they are potentially ambiguous. Isn't that a problem?
It's very ambiguous that the ambiguousness is so ambiguousness.
So, look, under the principle, estoppel of the principle to deny agency, they cannot even deny that you're the agent. So, Elena, when you're talking about remedy, if they're not allowed to deny that you're the agent because you're operating their property, if you start sending your stuff to the principal and you start expressing things correctly, guess what's going to happen? The principal has to balance the books. And if they don't, you can hold them liable.
Okay, so question. So obviously it takes some time in the mail, whatever. Mail runs slow these days anyways. Mm-hmm. But do the stamps or the security exchange, not exchange, security transfers, do those work as little Band-Aid fixes?
Nope.
No, in any communications that you do, don't use the basic snail mail. Anything that you do that's of any sort of legal importance that may come down to ending up in court, always, always, always use an administrative process. And regardless of how much the other entity may kick and scream and complain about that, it doesn't matter. Hold your stance, stay on point, and utilize the entire administrative process as it is meant to be. I just went through this with a so-called attorney that at one point she even claimed that she could not send anything to the notary because of the confidentiality protection. Well, the reality is when you put in a notice to this other entity, whatever it is, that all responses must be sent to the notary to create a third-party independent witness that is also an officer of the court. You have waived that confidentiality clause, and it still doesn't mean that the notary is going to open up the notice and understand what's even going on, because most times they're not even going to open the notice because it's not truly addressed to them either. It's addressed to the legal name that you're known to use because you're going to have it in care of. Mm-hmm. But the reality comes down to, regardless of what they say at the other end, if you continue to hold strong, ultimately they're going to end up knowing that you know what you're doing, and they're more than likely going to leave you alone, such as this one attorney has done to me. She just has disappeared into the woodwork.
Now, well, Elena, look at that. Look at the screen. Almost 5 years ago, I did, I used to listen to I used to look at all that stuff, the redemption manual and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It says, we received evidence at this office that you have attempted to establish a claim against the U.S. Treasury by fraudulently submitting documents in an attempt to assert ownership over Treasury securities accounts securities accounts or other funds of the U.S. Treasury. Your demand has no legal validity and is not payable through any federal or state agency. The scheme appears to be akin to a fraud, commonly known as redemption, asserting that the United States government has trust accounts linked to each citizen. They're not linked to you. You are the agent for the trust. You're just not doing things right. That's why you're being held liable. That's why you're having all these problems. It's their account, their property, their obligation.
The only thing it's actually potentially linked to is that so-called birth certificate,
which you have no first-hand knowledge that that's you to begin with, and that
exactly
document is actually considered double hearsay.
And nor do you have any evidence that that is even your birth certificate. In fact, there's more evidence that it belongs to the state than you, because if you look at the birth certificate, it is the name of the state that's run across the top. It's always the person that, or thing, the entity that owns it, that has the name across the top of anything. Yes. This is, again, how they get people thinking one thing and have no idea, but this is where the disclosure is. When I talk about disclosure, it's everywhere. It's all over the place. But again, the glory of God to conceal a matter, the honor of kings to search a matter out, for those that have eyes to see and ears to hear. If you understand and you look at that birth certificate and realize, well, damn, the name across the top, it must be who owns this. It certainly isn't mine then. Because they're telling you on the backside of the Social Security card that you don't own that name. They're telling you. It's not always in words, and it's not always going to be specifically where they're saying this, that, and the other. You have to be discerning and realize what it is they're saying, sometimes without actually saying it.
It's like chess, for example.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Exactly.
Pretty much. And in fact, one of the things when it comes to just in the essence of symbolism, people talk about the right wing and the left wing, Democrats and Republicans, this, that, and the other thing. But the symbol for the United States of America government is the bald eagle.
It's a bird.
Most people recognize that there is left and right wing on a bird, But that bird cannot fly if it only has one wing, and it cannot fly if those wings do not flap in unison. People think that, oh, Congress is fighting, the left wing is fighting against the right wing. No, they're not. They're working together. They just got you believing that they're not, so that they can keep you in bay, keeping you believing that you need them. When the reality is they've been working together since day one. The bird can't fly with just one wing.
So, and what, like, I don't really know how to word the question, but like, like the UCC, USC, and like CFR codes, at like what capacity do you have to be in to be able to like use those codes for like, like as like
Agency.
oh, so I just need to read the agency, like that 450-page paper.
The section on agency is not 450 pages. Remember,
well,
it's
ultimately, this
agency,
is something too.
Partnerships and LLCs. Just read the part on agency. Are you going to do a partnership in the future? Then read the part on partnerships. Are you going to do an LLC? Then read that. And corpus juris secundum, the workshop I'm doing, we're going through corpus juris secundum, which is 650-ish sections in detail about the duties of the agent, the duties of the principal, and the duties of third parties. In your situation with your mortgage, who are you communicating to? The third party. You're not even supposed to be talking to them. That's a estoppel of the agent to admit agency. You talk about public and private. You as the agent, you are already in the private. You, the woman, you're operating as an agent. You're supposed to be going directly to the principal. I know you've heard of cops. They have qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is a fancy term for agent. As long as they follow the rules of their principal, they have qualified immunity and hold no liability. But when they step outside those rules, they lose qualified immunity and can be held liable to the principal. It's the same thing in the law of agency. If that's their property, their obligation in all their documents, and you're not doing your job, how can that $30 trillion national budget ever get balanced when the agents that they gave this trust to provide for your necessaries are treating it like it's theirs and they're running amok on it?
This shit is a lot deeper than I thought.
Now, this is something that I will throw in there, and it is just a slight variation on what Preacher's talking about, and an ever so slight disagreement. Because of, like we were talking about earlier, I was saying that none of these GovCo agents have ever spoken with that stack of paper. They have never spoken with the principal, the actual principal. Truly speaking, and this is about as first line of principles and reasoning you can get, each and every one of these people truly are acting on their own accord because they are acting on hearsay. Now, in a general sense, that qualified immunity is in place. And for people that don't know what we're talking about right this second, yes, they'll never get to that cop, that DA, nobody. You'll never get to them. But the reality is, all you have to know is if you sue the cop as the cop, that qualified immunity is in place. But if you sue the cop as Joe Schmuck, the ragman, just you're suing the man himself. Now you can get to him. And the reason being is because if you sue the cop or the judge, the DA as that title, and them, you've already put up the bulletproof vest. You're doing it yourself. But if you sue the real man, they have to claim that they were acting on as an agent for the principal, which means that now they have made that claim that the principal actually exists in reality. It is their obligation to get that principal up on the stand to testify, to give firsthand testimony. This is a slight little variation where they do have that qualified immunity, especially if you don't know this one little caveat to the whole thing.
My buddy Mark in Minnesota, when they try to take him to court and violate his rights, he sends an invoice for $1 million to the DA's house in their personal name, not their official name, and to the judge's house, and to their spouses. You want to see, he puts the fear of God in them.
Love that for him.
That's what I'm saying. The stuff is not difficult. Go ahead, Jesse.
Well, I want to say this, and I don't want to say like I'm trying to argue with you or any of those things, because I'm not. I just want to give another viewpoint that somebody was saying last week, and I just wanted to run it by you and then see what you thought. And I don't remember the citation, but Spiritual Rock was talking about, she cited something where it basically said that the general agent, for all intents and purposes, will be treated just like the surety. I don't adhere to wanting to run around and being the general agent anymore. I'm trying to not be the general agent. So at the end of the day, in my opinion, it shouldn't be you trying to figure out how to be the general agent over these things. It should be to not have to be that general agent anymore. So you don't have to report to the principal. You should be trying to learn how to become the principal. And the last part of this is that, we live in a society, we know that there's this principle or this old cliche of that shit rolls downhill. Well, if you're at the bottom of the barrel, okay, and which is the general agent, it only makes sense that no matter what position you take, if they don't, and it's discretionary, they don't want to give you a pass-through, they're not going to do it. So I don't recommend ever just trying to master being the general agent. Try to master becoming the principal so that they have to answer to you and you not to them. I yield.
Yeah, Jesse, but here's the problem. The agency principal relationship has some certain intertwined rules. To learn one, you got to learn the other, because if you're going to be the principal, don't you need to know how to also treat the agent?
Well, yes. I agree, but I agree with you in principle. I'm just saying that to me, it sounds like you preach it in a way that if you do your job as the agent, that they're somehow or another not going to try to hold you as the surety when you're at the bottom of the barrel, bro. Man, they can do whatever they want to do. It's discretionary, Pastor. It's all discretionary in the public. In a commercial capacity, they have the final say-so.
Let me finish. When the agent is doing their duty according to the rules in good faith, the agent can never be held liable. When the agent doesn't do their duty, you are correct. They can be. That's why, like Popeye said earlier, they are going to test you. But to go into this thing blindly, not knowing who you are, is what everybody's problem is. And you know that, Jesse.
As soon as you step, just real quick, Preacher, as soon as one steps outside of that capacity as an agent, you have now stepped into the realm of meddling interloper. And meddling interlopers will get whatever they are asking for, even if they don't realize they are asking for it. Because they're essentially saying, I want to assume liability for whatever the hell, because I'm going to go and get into somebody else's business that I have no business in being in. So I'm saying that because I'm an idiot and I'm going to get into somebody else's business instead of minding my own, now I want all that shit to land on me because I don't know to stay out of somebody else's business.
Yeah.
That's ultimately what they're doing and what you're doing.
Mind your own business. Have you heard that before? Yeah.
Yes. In fact, I believe Plato said it best, and the truest form of justice is everybody mind their own business. Think about it. Stay the hell out of something that don't belong to you. In fact, I know of a brother that the sheriff came to the house and they were asking for the legal name, and he kept saying, well, there's nobody here by that name. And so the sheriff ended up turning around and walking off after a bit, and this brother screwed up. The sheriff was just walking out the gate, and the brother said, by the way, what does this have to do with? And as soon as that brother said that sheriff turned around and arrested the brother because he started to meddle and interlope because it wasn't any of his damn business, so why even ask?
Jesse, The reason I talk about agency is this. That is the foundational principle. It is. No matter which way you slice it, that is the foundation.
I have no problem with you teaching, though. That's not, agency is good. People do need to learn agency. My point is that you're thinking, and this is just my thought and my opinion, I could be wrong, right, or indifferent, or whatever, that if you're going to go out here and you're going to start acting like you're the agent, that somehow or another, at the end of the line, if the shit starts rolling down the hill, that you're not going to be held as the surety. When it, to me, in a public capacity, I know that there's the agency. I get it. But we're talking about being the surety primarily, which is the bottom of the barrel, the one that always has to pay for everything, gets put in jail, and then the bonds get taken, blah, 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 right? Well, if shit rolls downhill, man, and they're not going to want to have to come off of their ends or not be able to make their money, you're going to be the one that's going to be held responsible. General agent did his job or not. That's my point. They're not going to take it. Well, okay. All I know is that the House wins 98% of the time. The House wins 98% of the time. That's a high percentage.
Look, Jesse, the reason the House wins is because people don't know what they're doing. Popeye went into court, did this similar argument. He never used the word agency. He expressed the fact that the name was their property in a marijuana case.
Well, that's not expressing the agency. That's not what we're talking about, though. We're talking about somebody expressing the agency.
He expressed the principles. He said whose property it was. He said he's been known to use it. All that is an agency principle position. And 2 weeks later, what do? They do a telephone conference. They don't even ask him if it's him. They just accept it and say, all we need to know is the name and the birth date. That's all we care about. Because why? They're wanting the bonds. The agent is supposed to just settle the things like they're supposed to.
Well, I know. That's why I went up there to the courthouse and I went ahead and signed the paper and turned it over to him. Because that's really all he wanted to be done. He just wanted to do good business. I understand how to be equitable and go up there and handle those matters. But what we're talking about, how does one establish the agency and then get them to actually acknowledge it when you start expressing it on a piece of paper, right? Because if you signed a contract and then you gave power of attorney over to them and you never established there was even an agent operating in this contract, how are you going to come back and establish agency? You haven't. You signed power of attorney over. You're not the agent. You're the surety. So if you're going to use the law of agency, you got to go back and redo it right at the beginning of your contracts and establish that you're the agent on behalf of this entity. You're not signing as the surety.
No, you don't have to establish anything. It's established in law. Have you ever read the book, The Law of Agency?
The way you fill out the application establishes your relationship to the contract that you just entered into.
Correct.
Oh, Jesus Christ! Give me a break,
Jesse. If you put
That's
the
wrong.
name, hold on, Jesse. If you are the CEO of Microsoft, CEO is an agent, right? Does he go out there and express that he is not Microsoft when Microsoft is going to go buy property? No. What do they put on the information? They put the name of the business and the EIN. What is the social and EIN? He don't have to express that he's the agent for the company. It's already in law. If you would have read the book, The Law of Agency, you would know that, Jesse, but probably you haven't read it.
You have to write it down.
Which means you have not. There's a section in the book that talks about ratification. Ratification before the fact, ratification after the fact. And ratification is before the fact. You tell them as the agent what you're going to do in good faith and what the process is.
It's not a presumption that you're the agent. It's the presumption is that you're no. The presumption is you're the surety, and then you sign that document like the surety, and then you're held as the surety. You have to express on the paper who is what and what position you're holding, or the presumption will always be that you are the surety. They don't work on anything else but a presumption. It's a presumption every time. If you don't rebut the presumption stands. I'm not going to go in there and presume that I'm the agent of anything. If I'm going to be the agent, I'm going to establish it on the contract, who and what I am, and I'm going to take a picture of it and have a copy of it so that it cannot be refuted. I'm not going to go in there with hearsay that I'm something that I've never established on the record that I'm not. That's not how it works. Their world is a presumption.
Jesse, look on the screen. You see that? American jurisprudence, express or implied. I've went over this 100,000 freaking times.
You know what? And I went down to the county courthouse and I expressed who I was on the piece of paper, and they gave me a piece of paper that they don't give anyone else unless you express it that way on the piece of paper, who you are in relation to the trust.
Jesse, I'm not going to argue with you. The law is the law, no matter how you cut it. You are not even seeing it. You haven't even read the book to see what the laws are.
I don't need to read it to know that it needs to be on the piece of paper to rebut the presumption.
It does not. Do you know?
It does. If you want to operate that way, that's fine. But I'm not going to operate that way because their system operates on a...
I muted you because you're not going to listen. You're sitting here. You haven't even read the book on the law of agency. And you're sitting here coming across like your ass is an expert on this.
Well, I can just say from my own personal firsthand experience that without doing any expression of agency one way or another, that I've had so-called success, not only in a so-called courtroom, but over the phone with so-called creditors and so on and so forth. And in fact, the thing that's interesting about what Jesse is saying, to a great extent, that's basically what I'm doing, is I'm just not assuming anything. I'm not taking or assuming that position of general agency or anything. And I'm doing as little as I possibly can in that regard. And of course, the reality is, like we talked about, the only real difference is instead of doing it in the form of so-called paperwork, I'm just doing it orally, but I'm just simply asking who's claiming that, who's putting up the surety for any of the claims being made without assuming liability for squat.
Under implied agency, you don't have to have it on paper.
No.
You would be surprised on how many times implied comes up everywhere. Implied contracts, implied agency, implied ratification.
Well, there's implied contracts all damn day, and nobody gets a tissy fit over it. Implied contracts happen constantly. Probably a couple million times a day. I would venture to say, with all the people out there, so that there's allegedly 350 million people in the United States of America, of which I would say there's probably close to, maybe 150 at least of grown adult contractable age of majority legal to contract. And a good majority of those, at least 50% throughout the day, are going to be going through implied contracts. That's millions and millions of implied contracts per day. Millions. There doesn't have to be any words spoken. It just happens. One of the things, the example that I give to people to help them understand is, if you go to your favorite sandwich shop, it's lunchtime, you walk in, you see the girl behind the counter. She's the same girl that you see every damn day that you go there. She's on the phone, so you don't interrupt. You just nod to her as if to say, I want the regular. She nods back to you as if to say, as soon as I'm done with the guy on the phone. A few minutes later, the sandwich is on the counter. You go over, you pay for it. Now this just comes under two different categories of contracts. One, it is indeed an implied contract because no words are spoken. Not even an utterance of a sound. It also comes under a unilateral contract. That sandwich needs to be made before she's going to be so-called paid for it, compensated for it.
See,
this shit happens all damn day. And millions of times a day. by millions and millions of people.
I understand what he's saying. He talks about being able to express things. Yes, there has to be an expression, but there has to be a proper way to express it. People don't even understand the basic foundational principles that have been put in place to where they can operate, and they're running around blaming the government for their own issues. That's the reason I teach the stuff I teach. If you don't know the basic foundations of agency, contract, uh, trusts, and equity, how are you going to ever learn to operate? These paperwork pushers out there that are telling you to do my process to be this and be that don't know what the hell they're talking about. I've been there and done a bunch of them.
Well, there's also another thing, too. There's the two sides of silence. Now, earlier,
silence and acquiescence.
We have talked about that. You know, like I love to say, anything and everything that goes unquestioned, unrebutted, or unobjected to is considered to be consented to and or true. And that is an absolute fact. But there's also another side to that, and that silence is golden. And the time that it is golden is when you have asked a question. It is time to be as silent as a mouse. Don't make a peep. He who blinks first loses. When you ask somebody a question, you let them think about it. You let them answer. And the reality of this comes down to a couple of different things. First and foremost, in the essence of whatever you're doing, it allows that person to think about the answer. But then this also gives you the opportunity to study that person, to watch them, to watch their physical reaction, see if they're starting to fidget and twitch. Because if they are, it might mean that they're having a hard time with the answer themselves. And don't beat them up for it, because they're just going through a little bit of reality check, and that they're starting to realize, oh, wait a minute. I may not want to be answering this shit. Because like I said earlier, their answers to the questions lay out the playing field. It's their answers that are going to shoot them in the foot and quickly reload. It's not you doing it. And this is why I talk about studying everything that is important, because good, better, best. The better the questions, the better their response is going to be, and the less they are going to want to answer.
See, here's the problem. Here's the problem with what Jesse's saying. One, he's spouting claims that you're the surety no matter what you do. That is a bald-faced lie. I know too many people that has come at it from this angle that don't have any, and some of them have resigned as registered agent, and all those bills of attainders disappeared. Brian Parker's one of them. Ken W's one of them. And guess what happens? Now, to me, resigning is a mistake, because now you're waiving what little interest you may have in that name. But I've seen people regularly. There's a video of a guy on freaking YouTube. He didn't use the term agency. He used administrator. But if you pay attention to what the judge said what? Twice. Gave the guy an out. And the guy didn't even catch it. The judge said, you're either him or you are his agent. And he didn't even freaking catch it. These judges are the government admits everything. The people are not freaking reading it.
Yep, and there's no obligation when they're disclosing this stuff, just like with how preachers talking about it right now. There's
Everybody has
Jesse's
their own
sitting there
process.
saying, well, yeah, but not everybody has a correct process, though, King. Look how many different paperwork junkies are out there.
All right, so my point.
Pay me $1,000 and do my debt discharge class, and very few have success. Pay me $1,500 and I'll do your secured party package. And how many people actually know what it is and how to operate it?
That's not my point. I'm saying a lot of people within this community have different processes or the way that they wish to approach that they seek the best way for them to be. And it's like, once you you teach like the most comprehensive general outline course to really comprehend it all, to be able to portray that to others and the way that it intertwines.
And they now King, one of the things you bring up there is a course. Have you ever heard of American Jurisprudence and Corpus Juris Secundum? They're legal encyclopedias that actually tell you everything. They tell you everything about the system.
What's it called?
American Jurisprudence or Corpus Juris Secundum. And if you got $25,000, you can buy one of those encyclopedias. What do you think I have access to on Westlaw? Both of them.
I don't have the time for this one either. It's also the thing that, people are misguided by government agents. But, for example, let's say, this information teaches, there are certain tax credits that, there's certain things for certain people, and not everybody's going to want to learn the law in depth, and they're just going to be like, oh, hand me this, hand me that.
You're right.
So
most people are not.
Yeah.
The average person out there, they would rather have a template thinking that if I do this magical piece of paper, it's going to fix all my problems. It is not. That is not how it works. Because you can do the paper, but guess what? If you go to court, do you know how to enforce it? Do you know how to defend it?
Stance. Because in battle, you can either, hold your shield up and tap your sword against the shield, or you can, use your shield to deflect their sword and swing your sword. And it's all about getting them to the point, as you said, where, you swing your sword and what's said has been said and they need to come back and swing. But your shield is there when you swing your sword. So. Because everybody just wants the sword, but they don't want the shield. And that's the difference.
That's right. They don't want to learn. Most people don't care to actually learn the rules. They don't.
But it's freedom.
It's right, but most people don't want to be free. King, you don't want to be free. You don't want to be truly free. And I would be willing to bet money nobody on this call wants 100% freedom. Why? Do they want to go get them a plot of land and have a allodial title? Do they want to provide their own electricity, their own clothes, their own food, their own water without using anything by any other company? No, they don't. People don't want freedom. The problem is people don't understand how to avoid liability. That's the problem. People can have the niceties and learn how to do things accordingly so they don't have the liability. That's what's not being taught out there. They're teaching paperwork And King, I know you are in a bunch of darn groups that talk about different things, everything from the W-4 process to everything else. And what is everybody pushing? Do a template, do a process. This will fix your problems.
Yeah, everybody. So there's like certain groups that look to like monetize upon others, or they're just looking to like get the money so that they can support themselves, or just like learn how to discharge and reciprocate the credits. And everybody has like once you gather up like a lot of information and knowledge, you're able to discern certain things, but not being able to like actually go and write your own template is like another thing between the discernment is that, I may be able to, use my shield, but I can't swing my sword as properly as I should. I'm still at a wood sword. So. Like once you really comprehend it, you can write your own templates. You can create that type of information, and you can look at other people's templates that they put out there. But it's the ability to really.
It's why the old saying is this: principles of law are few and never changing. Methods are many and are fluid. Most people care more about the methods than they do the principles. If you learn the principles, you don't have to worry about the methods. You'll develop your own. Look at my buddy Mark in Minnesota. He freaking settled a traffic ticket with grains of rice. He let the judge find him guilty and then walked out to the clerk and started handing him rice. When he pronounced the amount of the fine, per se, he told Mark, well, your fine is $200. He says, well, Your Honor, in what tender should I settle this matter? He said, you know how to pay. So he had a bag of rice with a dollar symbol on that pouch. He walks out to the clerk, starts counting out grains of rice. The clerk says, we can't accept that, and calls the sheriff over. The sheriff is going to arrest him. He looks at the sheriff and said, what are you doing? He said, if you keep this up, I'm going to arrest you. He said, I got a contract with the judge. The judge told me I knew how to settle this matter, and I'm here to settle it. If you want to do anything other than that, go get the judge. The cop went and got the judge and never come back. He got a letter last June from the IRS. I don't remember word for word how he said it, but he said something along the lines. He sent it to the agent, to the head legal counsel of the IRS, to the IRS commissioner, and to the Attorney General's office. And he used the terminology out of the Constitution. He said, according to the supreme law of the land, I will be more than happy to settle this matter if you can direct me in what tender I am supposed to pay this, or something along those lines. He ain't got a response back since. Has this man done any magical paperwork, any secured party stuff? No. He knows the principles. That name and that estate was given to you to operate in commerce. But the problem is people run around here making assumptions on what it is and how they're supposed to operate it, instead of going and seeing what the principles of law says.
Hey, Pastor, I just want to jump in real quick. I'm meeting my family for dinner. I know it's early, but
it's fine.
They eat early. But thank you so much for inviting me into this call. And I'm definitely going to start understanding agency and take a pause from everything else. But I appreciate all the insight, guys. I really do.
That's what I'm here for, Elena. Anytime you got questions, feel free to ask.
All right. Thank you so much. You guys have a blessed day. Bye, guys.
You too, ma'am. I mean, Jesse's running around saying, no matter what, you're the surety. I'm sorry that you are so used to acting like the surety. That's the way I look at what he says. Okay, you want to be the surety? Go ahead. But there's nothing in that driver's license, as he says, in that social, that says you are the surety. If you claim it, they'll let you. Ain't that right, Popeye? I guess Popeye stepped away for a moment. And that's Jesse's problem. He knows there's truth to this agency thing, but he can't get his head away from being surety.
Can you hear me now?
Do things. I can now.
Ah, shit. Okay. I don't know why I was unmuted, but it makes sense now. I guess nobody was hearing me. Yeah. You assume surety when you make claims and do all kinds of shit. And the system is essentially set up for you to make the claim, to be the surety. It's how it's designed. But this is part of why I talk about the tests. And in fact, what you were talking about earlier, when nobody heard, because obviously it wasn't transmitting to you guys or something, but it's the same thing as when I'm asking to meet the claimant, the real party in interest, the one with the first-hand knowledge. This is some basic principles of law that do not change. That it's old, very old school. It's a little bit different than taking the law of agency, but essentially, in so many ways, I'm just doing it without even mentioning the word agency. Like Preacher was saying earlier, I'm not expressing it. I'm just implying it because I am known to use the name. I'm just simply asking, has anybody got any evidence that I am liable for that name? Same thing. The only difference is I'm not doing a lot of it in paperwork anymore.
Look, I mean, agency principle doesn't have to be expressed in that per se language. No, you don't have to say I'm the agent. The question is who owns the property? Ownership brings liability. So the question I have is who's the owner of the name?
Vital statistics.
That's part of it. They own the birth certificate. They will tell you that if you call them. Well, if it's their property, it's their obligation because ownership brings liability. They got to wrap their head around of this. Look what the elite live by. The elite live by the rule of own nothing, yet control everything, right? And guess what? If you don't have ownership of anything, you can't be liable for anything. And Popeye was on parole when that argument come up with the parole law, not parole, probation.
Right, probation. Yep. This is the thing. This is part of the reason why I do things the way I do, because simply put, going through all the so-called legal issues, of which there was actually a couple of them, one and then another kind of right behind, but I did an awful lot of paperwork along the way. And outside of it keeping them at bay, it wasn't really successful. And the reality is when some of this stuff, especially some of the motions that I was writing and filing into court and all, they were strong. They were exceptionally strong. Like it should have been shutting shit down right the hell now, kind of strong. But it wasn't. But yet this is where I do believe, along with several other things, I'd been targeted. One of the biggest ones is when I was arrested for the second issue, so-called, that something that should have been no more than a maximum of $25,000 bond. They set the bond at $1 million. So anybody who says that I wasn't being targeted is, well, you're obviously mistaken. But the reality came down to this: after between two different issues and several years of doing things with paperwork, when I switched to just simply asking a lot of the right questions in court, it went from just another hearing date to another hearing date to another hearing date to another hearing date to, okay, we've dismissed it. You can go home. We don't need you here anymore.
Hey, my buddy Mark had a 15-year felony sentence hanging on his head. Now, did he actually commit a felony? No. He had a little dispute with his former boss who, because of that dispute, turned around and accused him of stealing property from the company. They ended up locking him up, put him in jail for a while, and his court-appointed attorney comes in and says, "What do you think about the plea?" He said, "I haven't seen a plea. I need to see it." Well, she told him what it was. He said, "Ma'am, I haven't seen it. How can I agree to something I've never seen?" So she leaves, comes back a couple weeks later and says, "You had any thought on that plea?" And he finally asked her the hard question. He said, "Ma'am, you need me to plead guilty, don't you?" "Well, yes, we do." He looked at her and said, "Thank you for admitting you do not work for me. And I will be glad to plead guilty to that, but you have to give me lawful consideration." And then her face changed. Her demeanor dropped because she knew exactly what he said. There has to be lawful consideration for any contract. And she says, "Well, what consideration are you wanting?" He said, "I go home today and I walk out of here." And you know what happened? He walked out that day. They had to drop it all the way down to a petty misdemeanor just so he could walk out that day. See, these are principles. And people don't know the principles. For any contract to be valid, there has to be consideration. You go into McDonald's or Hardee's or some fast food joint. What is the lawful consideration? That's the food. They put the contract up on the wall. Like people think, well, I need a wet ink signature, like that's important. It's not important. Because that doesn't, just because there's not a wet ink signature doesn't mean there's not a contract. Did you have to sign paperwork to go into the fast food joint before you ordered your food? No. The lawful consideration was the food. As long as they fixed it right, you have to pay for it. If they didn't, they take it back, redo it at no cost to you.
Of course, this is the part of the reason why I stand on my point where I do. Because obviously, if the stack of paper with ink that all GovCo agents are so-called claiming to represent, if that piece of paper is not of legal capacity, since no agents can exceed the capacity of the principle for which they are claiming to represent, and you know this, and you're willing to and strong enough, you got the fortitude to stand on this point. Since they cannot bring that real party and interest forward for you to actually have what is known as a meeting of the minds. This is where it takes a little bit more fortitude, because I can assure you what this brother, the preacher's talking about, did. He knew what to do. He understood the contracts. He just didn't take it as far as he could have, in my estimation, because the reality is no agents can exceed the capacity of that principle they claim to represent.
Correct.
Just that simple. Now, is it that easy? No. And this is part of why I tell people all the time, if you're not willing to go to jail, such as I have, because you're going to go through a learning curve. You're going to go through a learning process. I cannot even role play with you enough to get you fully prepared to be in front of a judge. But the reality is, if you can stand on that point, they cannot bring that person, that real party in interest, the one with the firsthand knowledge, the one that's actually making the claim against you, the one putting up surety, they cannot bring that one forward. This is just like building a house. Building a house is just as simple as nailing a couple of boards together. And then you nail another board and another board. Now, is it that easy to build a house? Oh, hell no. Because you've got to cut these boards in the proper length. You've got to nail them into the proper spot. And there's a whole hell of a lot more that goes into it than just nailing the boards together. But the reality is, the basic principle of building a house is simply put, nailing one board to another.
Yep. I used to do that, so I know.
Oh, yeah. It is just that simple, but it is also that complex as well. And again, it's all tests, which means, like we were talking about earlier today, you're not going to get, because it's been a long call today already. But
hey, look, the law is the same way. The law is the same way. It's one board upon another, or one precept upon another, one principle upon another.
Yep. So, yeah, that being said, when you're in front of that court, it is going to be a test, and that judge is going to test the hell out of you. He's going to stand your ass up, and if you cannot handle it, you get what you get. Because they're going to test your intestinal and your mental fortitude. They're going to test it hard. They're going to put you through so much that you're going to wish you had never even been born sometimes. I know. I've been there. I have been there. When you're reincarcerated as many as 7 times, I can assure you, I have been there. But start to learn it, and you learn it well. And of course, there is no better place to learn it than when you're actually in that courtroom, in the game.
Man, the first ticket I got about 8 years ago was for a missing mud flap on my truck. Right? I mean, I went through and made a bunch of those statements at traffic court when I first come right out of my mouth and said, you know, I challenged jurisdiction at the beginning. I said, the state trooper started to tell his story. I said, hold up, Your Honor, this is what you said. Oh, so you have a question? I said, yes. We need to establish the rules of this court. For what jurisdiction are we operating in? He answered the question. He just didn't give me the answer I wanted. He said, oh, Dinwiddie County, Virginia, the United States. I said, well, Your Honor, you know that doesn't establish jurisdiction, being you're schooled in law. And I held up the ticket and said, I don't see it as a criminal matter because there's no grand jury indictment. He said, correct. I said, so the way I see it as a contract. Oh, no, it ain't no contract. I said, well, Your Honor, I presume it is, and I see constructive fraud. And as soon as I said that, he shut me down. $50 fine, you can appeal it within 10 days. He said, that's some law done away with 50 years ago. No, it's not. Constructive fraud is a principle. He knew that, but he couldn't have me exposing it to the people. So I took it to trial, and I argued Constitution. When I go, well, first, they saw me coming. I go up. The DA says, the state of Virginia moves to dismiss this upon payment of cost. And I said, I'll appeal it. The judge said, what kind of arguments you going to make? I said, constitutional arguments. He said, can I get everybody done first? I said, I smiled at him, said, yes, sir, you may. And I sat back down. Got everybody done, got everybody out, called me back up, and I made constitutional arguments in court. He disagreed with me on the void for vagueness, overreaching, and overbroad, which are constitutional principles. And then when I switched up my argument to contract law, that's when he finally dismissed it without payment of cost. He met me at my truck afterwards and said, "You done your homework?" I said, "Well, Your Honor, it's kind of up to me to know the law, not for somebody else to tell me what the law is." He laughed, said, "You're right." And I said, since he's a judge and he does this for a living, I figured I'd test him and say, see if he'd teach me something. I said, "Well, Your Honor," I said, "was I a little bit right?" He laughed. He said, "No, you were right on everything you said." That taught me right there. In court, they're stuck in a system too. They're not always out to get you, but they're not going to let you go if you don't know what the hell you're doing.
No, they have to continue business as usual, regardless of what you know. He who will be deceived, let him. So, again, like you told them, it's not up to anybody else to teach you this stuff. It's up to you to learn this shit. You got to get yourself into gear and do the footwork.
Exactly.
Nobody can do your push-ups for you, and you can't pay somebody to do them for you either. It doesn't work that way. You've got to get down onto the hands and push. Rep after rep after rep.
That's why I tell people, if you're not going to read and you're not going to do the work, and yeah, you're going to have trouble understanding it at the beginning. I did at the beginning. Took me 6 months to write Took me 6 months to write a court paper, and it didn't even look like a court paper. It looked like a business letter. It didn't even look right. But eventually, the light bulb starts going off, and you say, "Oh, I think I'm starting to see the pieces." You will. But if you don't spend the time reading their stuff and doing the work, you'll never get there.
Never.
You might as well just stay where you're at, complaining about government, and be done with it.
Yep. Think that, and of course, you got to realize that you're culpable for everything that's happening to you. It's all decisions that you're making. So if you decide not to even learn this stuff, this is what is known as ignorance, because you now know it is there. You know the information is available, and you're choosing to ignore it. You're choosing to look the other way. Welcome to the masses.
Yep.
Seriously. Because, again, this isn't for everybody. This is for those that are willing to have the eyes to see, the ears to hear, do the footwork, and figure it out.
Yep.
And I can assure you, too, for as much as you may think that you have it figured out on paper, just in reading and all, it won't truly come to fruition until you're actually in the game and doing it. In fact, I'm led to believe that in the world of medicine, there's a couple of steps to where it's how you really get there. First, you learn it. You learn one, you do one, you teach one. Now you know it.
Well, guess what? Don't they call it practice for a reason?
Could it be? And there is essentially something that I do just as a regular, and that is I play with so-called credit cards. I take them and go and max them out, and then don't do any so-called payments or whatever, because I can't ever seem to get a hold of the one claimant that I owe something. But I do this partly because I know that along with doing that is going to come the occasional random phone call where somebody on the other end is going to be making claims, and I've got to go full onion in a heartbeat. This shit keeps me sharp. I've learned in the courtroom, but just to keep me sharp, I have set up a little thing where I have some fun. I get to go and play with something called the credit card, and then I have people calling me and keeping me sharp. And ultimately, I don't worry about a couple of things. One, the so-called it's attached to the name. It belongs to the name. But for everything that they try to scare you with, do they ding that so-called credit score? Of course they do. They dipped it all the way down into the 3s this last time. And in less than a year, I'm already looking at a number now that is 6+ in less than a year. And all these so-called banks have charged off that so-called debt. And they're all now offering me credit again. Or actually to the name, I should say. But it's, it happens this way. And I know I have done this now 3 different times. 3 different times since I learned about money in itself and promissory notes and a few other things. I've done this 3 different times.
You think your credit score is bad? Mine's 666.
Heard a lot of the recordings from the last one, and there's some doozies.
Papa. I'm of the opinion now what the credit score is actually. It's not just about how well you pay your bills. It's how well you're protecting the trust. Because isn't that how the trust is identified? The Social Security is a trust. Okay, you went silent, Popeye. I guess Popeye dropped off again.
Can I ask, can you elaborate on that a little more, sir?
Elaborate on what, the Social Security number?
No, you said that your credit score, you might believe that it is based on how well you protect the trust.
Well, isn't that supposed to be what you're doing? I mean, that's what Cite Your Authority talks about. That's what I talk about. If you're the agent, your duty is to report to the principal so the principal can balance the books, right?
So in a sense, if you're reporting to the principal, your credit score should increase.
Yeah, because what does the Social Security number represent? It is
I don't know.
It's the identifying number for the trust.
The
account number.
I know that. Come on.
That's right.
I called and asked them.
Yeah, I know you called and asked them. So the point is, if that's what it is, then that number represents of how good a job you are protecting the trust, either by claiming to be the liable party or doing your job the way you're supposed to do it so they can balance the books.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. Gotcha. Just wanted a little clarity on that. Sir.
See, Jesse is so caught up on, you're a surety. If you don't do blah, 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 you're the surety. How can you be surety for the principal unless you're not doing your job right? Now the surety under the law of agencies does have the ability to come after you. I mean,
wouldn't you be the surety if you become the principal?
Exactly.
And there are people.
Go look at trust law. Trust law says the trustees are always liable for the trust. That's why you write your trust indenture with a hold harmless agreement. But the hold harmless agreement is only to the point that the trustee followed the rules of the trust. If they didn't follow the rules of the trust, guess what? That goes right back to the law of agency. The trustee is nothing but an agent for the trust managing the estate for the beneficiaries. When they do their job, they're not liable. When they don't, guess what happens? It doesn't matter how much of a hold harmless agreement you have, they are liable. It's like that with every single position that everybody's putting out, that you should be the executor, the trustee, the guardian, whatever. If the agent doesn't do their job under whatever official capacity it may be, they will have liability. If the principal's a liable party, why would you want to be them?
I don't want to be any of them.
Well, the honest thing, knowing Jesse, and he ain't ashamed to admit it, because he has admitted it. He's after a one big payout, saying that's his trust because that was his mother's creation. No, it wasn't. You have no evidence of that. He's thinking if you become the principal, he'll get a payout. No, that don't mean nothing.
Well, it's not yours anyways.
That's right.
You didn't create it, so.
What I've learned, I mean, what I've learned, there's ways to get, if you want a car or you want quote unquote insurance, stuff like that, over the past like 2 weeks, like being around, but it takes so many steps, and if you don't have the shield, even though you have the sword, it's hard to reinforce it. Even though I'm at like wood. In Minecraft, you go from wood to iron, potentially gold, and then you want diamond. It's kind of how it is. But diamond, what does diamond do? It reflects light.
Yeah, well, you can't have that shield of protection if you don't know the rules to the game.
Aren't the rules of the game normally written on the back of the box or like a manual that comes with the game?
Yep, that's right. The only difference is in this scenario, the government has to publish everything so you can go read the rules for yourself. But the problem is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. People don't want to drink. They want the wine, but they don't want to have to do the work to drink it.
But you can shoot the horse.
Yeah, and make it dog food.
Yo, Tim, I don't know if I should say this in here, but Pastor, I'm gonna send you and Tim a DM.
Welcome back, Popeye.
Yeah, I had to bolt for a minute. Had a couple things to deal with. Wife called, and there was something else going on. I had to deal with some business.
Tim asked a very good question, and nobody brought it up before now while you was gone. He said, Jesse's talking about being the principal, but isn't the principal the liable party?
Yes.
I said, yeah. So what is Jesse doing? He's trying to move into the liability side instead of saying, I don't want to be the liable party. I don't want to own this crap.
Well, yeah. Why would you want to assume liability for anything when it's already been assumed for you?
Yeah.
The reality is that's the whole idea behind the idea of the name and the Social Security, because it's your ability, your protection in commerce. They have already assumed that liability. It's just a matter of the fact, like you said, that most people don't recognize that, and so they assume the liability by claiming that name is theirs. And again, that's a test. When you step in front of a judge and they ask you, are you such and such? You're assuming liability when you say yes.
I'm Slim Shady. That's all I'm going to say.
This is part of the reason why I posted on the so-called YouTube channel. And in fact, I posted one the other day, right here in the room. They got to get you to claim that name. Of course, in that one that I posted the other day, for a while there, I had the tables turned on the girl when I was asking her to verify who she claimed to be.
Look at the arguments Jesse's making.
Yeah. Make me dizzy.
He said the point I was making is if you don't establish agency on the application, you don't have to establish it on the application. It's already implied. Someone handed over power of attorney and pledged suretyship. There is no agency being expressed. Those that have taken the class, I'm pretty sure we've actually saw that in CJS, and I know it's in AMJUR, it's in both of them. The freaking power of attorney is an agency position.
Well, could it be that that's part of why, without doing any paperwork or anything, the way I've been doing lately, that I have had so much success because I'm doing it without actually even expressing it? Could it be this is a whole thing that is completely implied, that I don't express anything?
You don't even have to use the term agency. The principles are built in. Go look at the term beneficial owner. What is a beneficial owner? One that is holding someone else's property and using it. Does that mean liability? No, that's what the general agent's for. You're the beneficial owner using that property to make the freaking trust profitable.
Which is exactly why, like I've said before, I don't do paperwork in a general sense. No need to. No need to. Just live it. And this is what I was saying earlier to Elena and basically everybody. If you understand the Bible, the New Testament is the part that teaches you how to walk the path. The Old Testament sets that foundation. This is why there is two parts as well. The old school Old Testament teaches you the foundations of law. The common law is in there, yada, yada, yada. And then there's the path that Jesus walked. When you walk that path as closely to what Jesus has laid for you, you're doing what needs to be done without saying a word.
Yeah.
This is why I say the very first thing that you should all do is walk the path that Jesus has laid. It's right there in the Bible. In fact, the part that tells you the most is when Pontius Pilate says to Jesus, "You're the king of the Jews." And Jesus says, "You say I am." They're telling you right there. Pontius made the claim. It's his burden to prove it. I'm led to believe that Jesus was asked a whole bunch of questions, and he replied with something like triple the amount of questions. Could it be that they're telling you that you need to be asking more questions as king? You are acting as king?
Now Tim,
could it be?
Does these items not say owner? What do you mean? As in somebody else owns it?
Yeah, I'm a little busy. I was just texting, but yeah, I mean, like the back of the social is pointed out. It says it's their property. The birth certificate, it's the state's property. Things like that. It tells you it's theirs, and
owner's liability. Why would you want to be the owner? Because if ownership is liability, why do you want to be the liable party? Now, something that come to my mind last week about the name. What does the Bible say? Where is the power? Doesn't it tell you that the power is in the name of Jesus? The Bible tells you what? It doesn't say there's any power in your name. It says the power is in the name of Christ. Well, if your name was created in sin, because why? Two sinful beings that are fallen, who pass that inheritance called sin to their offspring, then that name would be created in sin. Why do you have control of that like it has some kind of power? It doesn't. The name is in what? The name of Jesus Christ, not your name. And are you not operating as a believer, as an agent for Christ? Yes. We're supposed to do all things in his name. Doesn't it say that in the Bible?
Yep.
If you're doing things in the name of another, you are the agent.
Might I throw a quick Bible reference in?
Go ahead.
Throw it. It's a law book. God's law, man's law.
Yeah.
It's that simple. Which one do you guys want to follow?
Well, this is part of why I talk about when, in just the basic logical, real sense, though. If you look up and you do not see the soles of the feet of another man or woman, then who in the hell can legally, logically, in any way, shape, or form claim to be above you? The way I see it, all men and women stand side by side on an equal playing field. Could it be? Call it,
what's the term, Papa? It's equality. It's not equality in creation. It's equality in something, but not outcome. You hear a lot of conservatives talk about that when the left gets on this tangent
equal
of race.
Starting, but not equal outcome. Yeah,
that's right.
Equal beginnings, equal playing field to start from. But that doesn't, just because we're on an equal plane to start from, doesn't mean that we're going to have equal outcomes. Because if I play harder than you and I kick your ass, I get to win. That's all there is to it.
I mean, even the Bible lays that out. When it talks about the rewards given to somebody in heaven, look at the different types of awards that people will get based on what they did. Are they all the same? No.
Yep. No, it was not supposed to be equal outcome anyway. Just the same, in fact, when people talk about ridding the world of evil and bad, you're never going to do that. And in fact, I would argue quite the opposite, that to have evil in the world, to have bad in the world is essential. Because you have to have balance. How are you going to know?
How are you going to know good if you don't know evil?
Right. How are you going to know light if you don't know dark? How are you going to know anything if you do not know the opposite?
Duality.
Exactly.
Yes. Yin yang. It's everywhere.
Yep. You got to have it, or you will not exist. So for everybody that constantly talks about, we got to get rid of all the evil in the world, bullshit. Shut the hell up. In fact, I would say that you're the most evil of all if you're trying to do something that is impossible and trying to sway people to do the impossible. Stop it.
You can't get rid of the evil, because first you got to get rid of the evil that's in your heart.
Try that one first. Yeah. And when you can't succeed in that, come back and tell us how you're going to change the world then. Because you can't change anybody but yourself. The only thing you can do is be the change you wish to see.
Hey, it's like I told people, yeah, I may teach the stuff I teach, and people tell me that I'm one of the few people that actually makes sense. But can I save the world? No, I quit trying. Why? I'm not Jesus Christ, and if he can't save the world, I know I can't.
Well, I look at it this way. I'm not even really here to teach you. I'm here to transfer information. What you do with that information is completely on you.
That's right.
That's all I'm here doing, is I'm just giving you information. And of course, they say knowledge is power. Well, yes, this would be to a certain extent, but what you're learning here or gathering here is merely information, and the information simply sits in the brain until it comes time to apply it. And if you do not execute that application correctly, you haven't learned it yet. If that makes sense. And that does not mean that you're not going to. It doesn't mean that the knowledge hasn't become power in a certain way. But like we were talking about earlier, you only learn through your down times. So
blessed and then some. Yep, that's right.
So, and again, this is all part of the test. It's all part of the test. Nobody went through school without passing the test to get to the next grade. Well, life is continuance of the test.
Now, Al, I will agree that good did exist before evil. That is true. But how are you going to know what is good if you don't know what is evil?
Bingo.
I'll give you another example. People say that there's a contradiction in the Bible between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, because it says that God created the animals and the plants before man, but in Genesis 2, it doesn't say that. And I can't think of his name now. He actually brought up a good point. He said Genesis 2 appears to be what was done in the Garden of Eden, okay? Yes, God created everything in the world in that order. But how is he going to tell Adam and Eve that he did it if he didn't do it in front of them in the garden? Because then the devil could come by and say, hey, did God really create all of this? And that to me makes sense. That yes, God created the things in front of Adam so he couldn't be deceived when he placed man in the garden.
And believe me when I say,
did they recognize Eve? Did they recognize evil in the garden? No, they did not. That's the reason Eve was able to be deceived, because why? She didn't experience the creation, and the serpent came afterwards and deceived her and basically said, is that true? I mean, maybe you'll be God if you do this, blah, 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 right? She didn't recognize it because she didn't know what it was. Adam did. Oh, I figured you'd agree with that.
Frankly speaking, this is one of the things, besides some of my own spiritual experiences,
just some basic logic. Creation had to be. There could not have been evolution such as the way that it is discussed in school.
Espoused, yeah.
It's not possible. And one of the basics is, how do babies raise babies? Because if evolution
even the legal
happened,
system,
if that happened, how did the babies raise babies? Where was the grown-ups to help raise the babies to begin with? It doesn't. There's huge illogicalness in that alone. How did the babies raise the babies?
And go now, take that to the legal system. Infants raising infants. You're acting in infancy and don't even know it.
Could it be? Bam! I dropped the bomb on you. Yeah. Could it be it's right there? Part of the reason why the Bible must be the rule book from which you are learning. The majority of what you should learn should come from the Bible. And I'm saying this is one that hasn't even read the whole Bible, but I do read it and I do take from it. Because I do believe that it is the rule book. And this is, again, from one that, as I said earlier, I have problems with the Bible based on certain things. But I still say that you better learn that Bible because it is the rule book, or you will not get through the tests.
Now let's see. Oh, come on. What are we doing, people? It's just a little water. More like a lot. It's freaking pouring down rain all of a sudden. How's it going, Alex? I ain't seen you in a while.
Good. Can't complain.
It don't do no good, does it?
Not really. People just laugh at you.
Well, hey, brothers and sisters, I'm going to bounce. Love you all. Been fun. Been exciting. And I'll talk to you all soon.
Talk to you later, Popeye.
Bye-bye, brother.
So, anybody got questions? Thoughts?
I've been in in a faraway place, moving in-law from San Antonio to Dallas since my father-in-law passed. So I've been out of commission, literally. But my question is a person that I know that is on probation. All false trumped up charges, but he took the plea deal. And what is he still? Does the agent rules still apply when false?
Yeah, it still applies. It still applies. Look, when they take you to jail, what's one of the things they call you when you're in jail or prison? They call you what? A trustee?
They call you principal.
No, they call you a trustee. I mean, you'll see that term floating around in the jails and the prisons. Why are you the trustee? You come in there claiming to be that.
Now, you know what's interesting is on one of my tickets, the only ticket I got, it had on there the all capital letters name. It says hereafter principal. And of course, at that time, I wasn't paying attention, but it actually had on there hereafter principal. And then it went all this other stuff. And then I had to sign, what do you call it, recognizance or whatever it is to get out.
Yeah.
But it had principal on there.
Yeah. But now, to your question, though, yeah, it still applies. The problem is people don't know how to handle things. I mean, that name is the trust. It's not you. You're not a trust. You're not a piece of paper. You're not a contract.
So how would he ever rescind or get out of the probational thing if he it's too late?
No, it's never too late. Look, Popeye actually did probation, and he actually got out of it. You'll have to go back and listen to the recording when he talked about it, because I'm not going to get it word for word right.
Right.
But in the 3.5-hour video, I think that's where the best description is at, where it was titled "Discussion with Popeye."
Okay, that one. Yeah.
Yeah. He actually he's risking going to jail. He calls the freaking probation office and said, "Hey, I need to speak to the person that has an interest in this matter. Who is the person with the firsthand knowledge, right?" And they hee-haw around. They can't never show who it is, et cetera, et cetera. And they get the guy, whoever the person was in charge, calls him up and says, well, he wouldn't ever say whether he was the interested party or not, but he tried to trip him up and said, well, you're supposed to. The guy couldn't, every time he would put out another definition or another sentence, he would say, would you please define that word? And he ended up, he said, well, hey, that's what, you have a car. He said, well, define car. He said, that thing you travel in and you go to the gas station, and he said, you get.
You're breaking up.
It's like they're shutting them off so we can't hear it. Every time you get to the good part, Pastor, they shut you off.
I was on that call. The whoever asked Popeye, how do you pay basically for gas without saying that? If that makes any sense.
Say that again.
Where he kind of cut off the second time about talking about driving the car down the road, and when the car needs gas, how do you pay? Was the premise. And so Popeye kept saying, well, what's a car? What's a road? And then the guy says, well, what do you do when that needs what it needs to go? Popeye says, I go get what it needs to go. And that's it. That's what I do. So he basically doesn't admit to pay for gas.
Right.
Was the
Gotcha. So it's the word game.
Because the probation officer kept, or whoever he was talking to kept asking him about paying, and Popeye's like, well, what does that mean to pay somebody, et cetera, et cetera. You should go back and listen to the call, the video. I was on it.
Which one is it? Because like I said, I've been out for 3 weeks, man. So it feels like I fell from a college grad all the way down to kindergarten.
Oh, you're good, man. It was about 2-3 weeks ago, but it's on his pastor's YouTube. It just says general discussion with Popeye. It's like 3 hours and 37 minutes. I don't know exactly when we had that conversation, but I was on it.
Appreciate it. I'll be definitely
no problem.
looking at it. Pastor must have got into the rain.
Reservation where the cell phone service only allows T-Mobile or something like that.
You haven't fallen very far, Al. 3 weeks out, not much has changed.
Appreciate that, but it feels like it when you see 1,001 messages that have gone on pastors.
Finally,
I'm like, oh, there you are.
I'm like, I guess the storm was worse than what I thought. I mean, you had trees in the freaking highway. I had no cell service. It's like, what the crap?
I tried to explain it to him because I was on that call, sir, but obviously my expertise level isn't as high as yours, sir.
Well, I mean, it's just, he got it. Every time he would throw out a sentence, Popeye would get him to define the word. You know, what is a car? What is, you know, you go to the gas pump. Well, what's gas? You know, you stick the hose in the car. What's a hose? He would never get Popeye to admit to any of these things, right? And when it was all said and done, the guy give up on that and says, well, don't you own a car? Well, where's your firsthand knowledge that I own anything?
The clothes on your back.
Yeah, he said, what, you own the clothes on your back? He said, well, sir, I'm led to believe God owns that. And that was the death knell in the entire conversation with that guy. After that, a week later, he has another conversation with the guy, and the guy wouldn't touch the word pay. He wouldn't touch the word ownership. He wouldn't touch none of this stuff. And then one day he got a letter in the mail that the debt was discharged.
Okay. Appreciate it. I'll be listening to that video. That's
Hey, Pastor, what's going on, buddy?
What's up, brother? How you doing?
Oh, finding the sign.
How can you be the grantor of something you have no knowledge of its creation? So this is the thing. Some of the things people say make absolutely no freaking sense. When it comes to the straw man account, they throw things out there hoping it fits. I'm like, he said, I'm starting to think the real grantor is you. Well, how can you be the grantor for something you have no firsthand knowledge of its creation? And honestly, if you really want to get down to it, the grantor is the Congress. That's who created the Social Security Act and how it all applies. So where do you come into it on being a grantor?
Pastor, I have a question about something that Myron Rice was successful in doing, and another group, this lady was successful in doing it as well.
Doing what?
Basically canceling the bond that you have with the court at the Secretary of State level, I guess. And then when there's no money to be made off your trial or whatever, then they basically let it go. Yesterday, there was a lady that was successful in canceling the thing on her husband, so they let him out of jail. And I remember Myron Rice talking something about this. What are your thoughts?
I don't know nothing about what they're talking about, so I'm not saying it's not possible. I mean, how do you cancel the bond through the Secretary of State? That'd be my first question.
Maybe they're using the estate to pay the bond, to pay the tax.
I don't know.
If that makes sense.
I haven't talked to Myron Rice. I haven't talked to Myron Rice on it, so I have no knowledge.
Set of 6 videos of his, and in one of those videos, he kind of mentions it. Maybe like a 2-minute talk or whatever, maybe even a minute, like short, you know.
He said, scientifically speaking, it is impossible. He said, scientifically speaking, is it impossible to be here without those things existing beforehand and being attached to me? No, you think it's attached to you. I just freaking showed a documented evidence where the Treasury even admitted that those accounts are not linked to you. I mean, I don't know. I've showed that letter twice I got from the Treasury in the first video recorded and in this video.
But Pastor,
It's
how
just
do we
like they
get
tell
interest?
you every freaking thing.
How do we get interest as the agent then, if it's not somehow linked to us?
Hold on, Al. I didn't hear you. Try that again.
I say, how do we get interest in the name if we're just an agent or we don't have it?
Now, how do you get interest? Are you talking about interest like you would get on a bank account?
No, I'm saying, how do we have that interest to be the agent if it's not connected to us?
Because you're the beneficial owner of it. You're out there using it to do these things.
Got it.
You're working for this trust, but you've been working for free all this time.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Slavery's still illegal.
Yeah. That's good.
Well, let me rephrase that. Forced slavery is illegal. Voluntary is not. They don't say anything about voluntary servitude. They actually tell you by not saying it that it's legal.
So if you claim to be the slave, you are the slave.
Jesse said, just stop. They took my blood at birth from the bottom of my foot. Do you have firsthand knowledge that they did it? No. Does that prove what they did with it? No.
So, Pastor, are you saying by process of elimination, the only position we can be in is agent or beneficial owner?
No, the beneficial owner is an agent.
Okay. And
now
that's by
you're not.
process of
Because why? If you're not the grantor, do you remember its creation?
Nope.
Are you the trustees?
Nope.
Do you have evidence you're a beneficiary?
Actually not.
Then what else could you be?
Process of elimination. Okay.
He brings up the blood from the foot, right? Well, how do you explain those that they stopped doing that roughly 10 years ago? because there was a lawsuit against, I think, against the United States over the fact that they were taking blood from the baby's foot to get DNA information. And there was a lawsuit on the constitutionality of it. And the court, if I'm not mistaken, ruled that they couldn't do that. And guess what? They had to stop. See, everything he's saying, he's not recognizing the mere fact that everything he's espousing is not from a stance of firsthand knowledge. Do I have firsthand knowledge they took blood from my foot? No. Is it possible they did? Yeah. When did they start doing that? In 1973. I don't know exactly what month. It's just what I've read. When was I born? In 1973. Does any of us remember what happened when we were born? No. That's not firsthand knowledge. So what does it prove? Absolutely nothing. You're claiming that something happened, and it may have.
I watched it when they did it with my son.
You have the firsthand knowledge.
No, they did. They took it from the placenta and the umbilical cord. They didn't take the blood from my son.
That's right.
Or maybe they did, but that's when I said, "Hey, I was wondering if I could keep that." You know, just joking because I had no clue back then.
Yeah.
You know, and I think I asked, "Why are you taking blood?" They're like, "Oh, they'll run tests."
And Tim, so do I.
You remember that?
Yeah, I mean, I have doctor's reports. I have my whole medical file. And the language in the medical file is very freaking interesting.
No, from like, were you there for the birth of your child?
For my daughter, I was there for the birth, but not for the whole process. Soon as she was born, I had to get on the road because I had to go deliver a load of chicken to the Bronx.
Okay, yeah, no, because it literally happened like within a couple minutes. Because my son was a C-section. Because my daughter was a C-section too. Emergency.
My daughter wasn't. She was born naturally. And see, and none of those accounts are linked to you, but somehow you're the general agent. Yeah, it's called implied agency. If somebody gives you their property to operate it, that makes you the agent. That doesn't make you the owner.
But it makes you liable if you give them the agency.
If you don't do things right, it makes you liable.
Well, no, I'm saying if you don't know this and you
That's
say,
right.
I hire a property management company, for example, but one of my tenants injures themselves because something got broke. They could sue both. They could come after me and the property management company for not doing their job.
Yeah, because if the property management didn't fix your discrepancies, then both could be liable.
Or if they just got injured in general, then the property management company wouldn't be liable if it was not of their fault. But then they could come after the actual owner, the principal, the surety, the 700 other words that they have for that.
So is there I think talking about this way back in the past in regards to linking, they're making the lien, and I've heard this I guess Yusuf style, they're making a lien on the straw man, and you are the person, or not the person, sorry, you are the man or the agent for the straw man, and they're putting the lien on the straw man because, like you said,
that's right.
Right. So they can't be putting the lien on you, but you have to operate as the agent to report the lien to the principal or the trustee.
No, the principal is the trustees. They're
Okay.
placing a lien on the trust, right? Let's
so
see
it can't
here.
be you because they can't put the lien on a man, and that's what I was wondering about when they said you can't mix the two. Remember, this was a while ago when we were saying only corporate can deal with corporate; they can't deal with the man, and I never got the clarity on whether they're able to do that, because obviously they can, because they're
Well,
friendly.
and here's something else. Here's something else you got to think of. They have to tell you everything, right?
Right.
Let's see here.
Gentleman always gives notice.
That's right. Now, let me know, can y'all hear this?
A little narrow in terms of what the definition actually is.
Right.
The state.
Can y'all hear that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now let's go back. Let's go to here.
The new section creates an exception to the exception, so that an assignment by or to a healthcare provider of a healthcare insurance receivable and any subsequent assignment of that right is now an Article 9 transaction. And this will certainly facilitate security interests in healthcare receivables held by providers as original collateral and not only as proceeds. Technically, healthcare insurance receivables are a subclass of accounts. Commercial tort claims have been brought into Article 9 to a limited extent. If a commercial tort claim arises out of the borrower's business or profession, except for after-acquired tort claims, which don't come in, and claims arising out of personal injury, which also don't come in. This inclusion will make it possible for the injured party who holds such a commercial tort claim to borrow against it, perhaps securitize it. I'm not so sure where it's going to go, but it's an interesting concept for us to consider.
Boy, that's a lot that they brought in. You know, one commentator has asserted that the effect of revised Article 9 is mostly to make sure there's no unencumbered assets in a Chapter 11 case and no Section 544 recoveries in a Chapter 7 case. What do you think about that statement?
Well, no one could deny that there was a strong feeling among those representing secured creditors who were active in the drafting process that trustees should be deprived of assets. But I think when you come down to the bottom line, when you come down to the bottom...
Look at that. You see how they all giggled? You know, that deprive the trustee of their assets, and they all giggled?
...line, I think we're going to find that it doesn't make an awful lot of difference. For example, now revised Article 9 says that the secured creditor has a security interest in deposit accounts. Can have. Well, we could always do that in the past. It just took more paperwork. You might need a lockbox or some other kind of device. You could do it. So I think if you look at the practical impact, trustees are not going to be deprived of much that they weren't deprived of previously by aggressive secured creditors.
Judge, the point that you make about how bringing in these additional items of collateral into revised Article 9, that now for the first time can you take a security interest in those assets. You just had to do it under other law when we were dealing with former Article 9, and other law was often hard to find, it was expensive. So the net effect of bringing in these additional assets may, yes, make it easier and simpler for secured parties to take security interests, but it'll also be cheaper. And hopefully the benefits of having a lower transaction costs will be passed on to the debtors.
Well, perhaps so. It certainly will make it simpler. Mm-hmm. And as an old-timey
loan doc person from my youth. I like things that make loan transaction documentation simpler.
Yeah, although it'll be interesting to test that proposition empirically. I mean, it's unclear to me that you have an economy that can really absorb those kinds of costs in terms of deposit accounts and the other things that are brought in. I think the other point that was made,
But you heard what he said at the beginning, talking about securitizing it and stuff like that.
Yes.
That's what they're doing. They're doing commercial tort claims. And they're securitizing the accounts against the trustees.
Works out neatly. I mean, this is, I think, a major improvement in the enforcement of ag liens, which have always been a bit of a problem. There's a new concept in 9 for health care insurance receivables.
What happened at most hospitals? This right here is important. You signed a contract for your children to receive health care, right? You gave an assignment to the hospital. That's a health care receivable.
Their interests or claims under a policy of insurance, that's a right to payment of a monetary obligation for goods or services rendered. Now, you recall under old 9 did not apply to a transfer of an interest in or a claim under a policy of insurance, except for proceeds to some extent. The new section creates an exception to the exception, so that an assignment by or to a healthcare provider
Actually, let's go here. Search. No. Right here, Christ Community Health Services. What does it say right there? Authorization and assignment. This authorization and assignment is a permanent one-time signature which will remain on file and will be used for future claims. I may revoke it at any time by written notice. What are they talking about in that video?
Of a health care insurance receivable, and any subsequent assignment of that right is now an Article 9 transaction. And this will certainly facilitate security interests in healthcare receivables held by providers as original collateral and not only as proceeds. Technically, healthcare insurance receivables are a subclass of accounts. Commercial tort claims have been brought into Article 9 to
Now here's the section with the court cases. And watch how they giggle.
A limited extent. If a commercial tort claim arises out of the borrower's business or profession, except for after acquired tort claims, which don't come in, and claims arising out of personal injury, which also don't come in. This inclusion will make it possible for the injured party who holds such a commercial tort claim to borrow against it, perhaps securitize it. I'm not so sure where it's going to go, but it's an interesting concept for us to consider.
Boy, that's a lot that they brought in. You know, one commentator has asserted that the effect of revised Article 9 is mostly to make sure there's no unencumbered assets in a Chapter 11 case and no Section 544 recoveries in a Chapter 7 case. What do you think about that statement?
Well, no one could deny that there was a strong feeling among those representing secured creditors who were active in the drafting process that trustees should be deprived of assets. But I think when you come down to the bottom line, when you come down to the bottom...
And look at that. Look how they giggle. You see there? They tell you what they're doing. Does that open your eyes, Al?
Boy, that's a lot. Wow, but they are, yeah. And I had seen that a long time ago because that's an old video, but didn't understand the verbiage until now what they were actually talking about. Because you can look up all those words and then still be further down the rabbit hole, but you put them. I mean, now, wow, it's so crazy.
Why do you think I say the things I say?
It's wild. All I could say to those guys, now they're just doing their job, but if they're doing it deceptively, the word from the Bible is woe. The woes to those that are doing it deceptively. But they're telling us, so you can't say it. They're not telling us. At least they're not letting us know. They might be using some extra words, not the common vernacular that the average person uses. But yeah, they are telling us. And my woe is WOE, not so much WOAH.
I mean, I used to think like a lot of these people. I used to look at things that way because I followed the same freaking gurus. I didn't rush out and do everybody's process like David Straits and stuff like that, but I used to think the same way. And the more I dug and the more I learned and the more I realized, it's like, hold up. They are telling us what they're doing. We're the ones making the presumption that it's all about us. Well, that's the definition of narcissism if I have ever seen it.
Oh, come on now, Pastor. That was a low blow, man. I resemble that remark.
Guess what, brother? I'm preaching to the choir because I used to think the same thing.
Amen.
And even Popeye has said that he struggles in that area with getting it out of your mindset that you have to own everything. It's just hard to overturn all these years of thinking a certain way.
And when you really get to think of it, it's actually a lot easier because you don't have the liability or really the baggage that goes along with owning. In actuality, I remember hearing about, I don't know if she was from North Korea or whatever, and I'm not saying in comparison, but it came from North Korea, and then she escaped over here to America, but she was so mind blown with how many choices she had to make. If you only have to make a few choices, you're not under so much stress. But she had to choose what type of cereal to eat. I mean, just in the basic things, what breakfast to eat. And it's nice to have those choices, but sometimes the more choices you have, the more problems you have. I kind of got into an old man habit of just going to the same place, so I don't have to look at all these different menus and all these new things. I just want some bacon and eggs and coffee. Okay, toast maybe.
Yeah. So Tim Forbes, did you word that correctly? He said, it's not my name on the docket, but I'm damn sure going to go in there and say it's me. I'm trying to understand your thought process Because why would you go in there and say it's you?
He's just being a smartass.
I thought so. I just wanted to check. I don't assume any kind of emotion or, none of that stuff when it comes to somebody's types. You got a lot of people, especially women. You will send them a text and then they're mad at you because they misunderstood what you said, thinking you were whatever emotional state. And you're like, hold up, honey. No, I wasn't. Trust me, I've had that discussion with my wife before. I learned a long time ago, when somebody sends you typed out messages, don't presume your feelings to it. But it's like when you hear them admit this stuff in their own words, and then you start seeing the documents and how they apply things and where the language is at, how can you deny any of this? And Jesse honestly is coming from the standpoint of wishing that was his estate, because like I said, he has said it more than once that he wants the big payout. Well, the Bible plainly says, thou shalt not covet. Why are you coveting something that isn't even yours? Because that's what it boils down to. And Jesus said what? Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God's. Well, who created the Social Security Trust? Caesar did. Who created you? Did they create you, or did God create you?
Marvin Gaye, he had a hand in creating me, sir.
Well, I'm sorry that you have a different daddy than your brothers and sisters. I mean,
no. I meant like just listening to Marvin Gaye got my parents in the mood. So I think that he had an influence on that.
Now that's a possibility.
I was just trying to lighten up the mood, sir.
Oh, I'm in a good mood, but you're fine, Tim. I didn't take you serious. I was going to say your dad was the milkman, but you admitted Marvin Gaye, so I figured, hey, why not?
No, I said my dad was had a part in it.
That's good.
But no, my dad is the milkman. That's what my brothers all told me.
Well, darn. Hey, my brother, we joked around all the time and said my brother was the milkman's baby. Why? Me and my sister will burn like a freaking lobster. My brother will tan.
Or mailman.
Yeah, and I'm like, there's no way that he's yours. Dad, there's no way he's yours. I mean, me and my sister, we turn red out in the sun. He don't. He turns dark.
Thanks for the speed up course, the rejuvenate course, and I'll be getting in your classes there, Pastor, here soon. We just got to get the grandma in her not final resting place, obviously, but in her new dibs. We got everything on the trucks. We're moving down. Man, it's just been crazy. But I'm back. Yes, hallelujah. Thank you. But yeah, so this is good.
Yeah. So Scott, you've been quietly listening. You're new here. You got any thoughts?
Well, at this point, what I can say is that I've had, I want to say, an experience with laughter from the other side of the phone.
What?
And that came by way of a third-party debt collector.
Yeah.
And I sat there and turned around. I answered the phone. And I told the woman on the other side of the phone, she was like, hello. I said, hello, how may I help you? She said, well, can I speak to Scott White? I said, well, he's unavailable at this time. I said, but I'm the agent of that name. How can I help you? She was like, "What?" I said, "I'm the general agent for that name. I sometimes use it, but I can help you. What do you need?" She sat there and she giggled. She literally giggled at me and was like, "Are you playing games with me?" I said, "No, ma'am, I'm not. But if you perceive that I am, that's on you." And she hung up on me before I could actually start with the agency part.
I did that recently.
I've already done that too. I've done that too.
I did that recently with a debt collector. They called me. They asked about the name, and I said, "Well, I'm the agent for that estate." Well, we don't have anything on writing about you being an agent. I said, "That's not my fault. I thought you knew who you were calling. You called me." They have not called back.
Oh, neither did this lady. She didn't call back either. But I've been telling everybody it's at the same time. I've done what you did, and I did the FOIA request, and I got the same response that you did.
For the United States citizen, yeah.
Yep.
That's when I realized a lot of the gurus out there, like the status correction people and stuff like that, you blame the courts for operating on a presumption. Is it the courts operating on a presumption, or are they letting you presume who you are? If you believe it, they won't tell you no different. Remember, you have a First Amendment.
Right. I mean, you can just sit there and walk into court, and as soon as they turn around and say, "Okay," they call that name, and if you stand up and say, "Here I am," you're already guilty of it.
Yeah, you're pleading guilty to something you have no firsthand knowledge of.
That's what I believe.
How does that work if they call you from the outside lobby into the courtroom? Would that still apply?
It still applies. I mean, you go in there to what are you doing? You go in there and say, "I'm here to handle the matter for that estate," as the agent. You know, if they try to push the issue, like Popeye said, the judge said, "Oh, I'm gonna have to issue a warrant for his arrest for failure to appear." He said, "Hold up, Your Honor. I've been known to use that name, but I'm led to believe that name's property of the United States," and hands them the freaking social. The judge can't deny that. It's written on the back of the card. And what did Popeye further say? He said, "I've been known to use that name, but for me to use it illegally would be fraud. And I know this court's not trying to have me commit fraud in open courts." That's what Popeye said.
Does anybody know what the micro print around the name and the social security number actually says?
Yeah, Social Security Administration, over and over and over.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we actually tested that theory because we had heard a rumor about it. So we had to do some zooming in and taking pictures and zooming in and all this, that, and the other to see it, because we didn't have nothing to magnify it enough. But one of the things under the law of agency, your personal checks say authorized representative. Well, authorized representative is synonymous to agent. I proved that in the class because it even said it. I'm like, how can we deny the very words they say? But people love to do it.
Yeah, that beneficial owner versus beneficial ownership. That was eye-opening. How broadly different those words are, even though they're very similar.
Yeah, beneficial owner. You're the beneficial owner because you're using it, but it's someone else's property. Beneficial ownership is for the beneficiary, which you have no evidence that you are.
Did you see my message I posted earlier about the city charter? not having a judicial branch?
No, I did not see that.
Yeah, so I came across this other this YouTube video someone from another group directed me to, and they get real into the municipality, the American jurisprudence behind municipalities, and the city charters. And I guess they found some type of things there. I can't remember the exact term, but I think it's like a redistribution of power or something like that. So only Congress can enact laws, and these cities are like pushing out ordinances and statutes and things like that. I haven't really gotten too deep into it, but I was reading the city charter, and I noticed that there's no judicial branch. There's executive and something else, but there's
AMD,
no judicial.
would you read that? Authorized what?
Authorized signature.
Authorized signature? Because right there at the end, it almost, being it's hard to read, almost looks like it says agent, authorized agent. But yeah, signature. And if you go read what it says in signature under UCC, under the UCC, it talks about signing on behalf of the principal as the authorized signer or representative. And yes, they make money on the debts we create because why? We're creating them in the name of the trust so the trust can be funded. That's why I tell people it's a symbiotic relationship. God gave us this land, God gave us this government, and we have a duty just like they do. I'll tell you now, I've actually really starting to understand what it talks about in the Bible about in the last days there'd be lawlessness. In the King James it says iniquity, but the Greek word means lawlessness. People don't care about the laws. They just want everything to be their way. And by the way, for those that taking the class in here, I'm going to put out an email this weekend on it. The next class will be on the 6th. And tomorrow we'll be in the workshop group, so that way y'all have any more questions or got documents, we can go over them for those that are taking the workshop. So anybody else got any questions, thoughts? You all right back there, driver? I should have known. Swift drivers, they don't use CBs. Well, I guess we'll call it a day, and I'll meet y'all that's doing the workshop in the workshop group tomorrow at 3 Eastern time. So y'all have a wonderful day.
Have a good rest of your day, sir.
I'm going to do my best.
Thank you, Pastor.
You're welcome, Tango.
Yeah, thank you very much. Peace and blessings, everybody.
Y'all have a wonderful day, and God bless.